On the shadowy streets of Brooklyn, where being loyal is like money and staying quiet is how you stay alive. A young boy with marks on his face would grow up to become one of the most important leaders in the Gambino crime family. People called him Michael DiLeonardo, but everyone would come to know him as Mikey Scars. He was born into a family with deep ties to the mob, but he would end up being the most important person to ever tell the government its secrets. This is not just another gangster story. This is the story of a man whose grandfather helped start the very same criminal group that he would later help take apart. He was a man who worked right beside John Gotti, a man who built a huge criminal business using fear and force, a man who lived in giant houses and controlled millions of dollars from illegal jobs. And then, in one move that broke the most important rule of silence, he helped send 80 of his own crime family brothers to jail. From the neighborhood streets of Benhurst to the courtroom where he ended an empire. From having all the power in the world to the greatest act of betrayal. This is a tale about being loyal, about staying alive, and about the huge cost of both of those things. This is the story of Mikey Scars DiLeonardo. It is a name that still makes people in the criminal world feel afraid and makes everyone wonder about honor, betrayal, and what it really means to be a full member of the mob. Before we start this trip into one of the most interesting and debated lives in the history of organized crime, I want you to do something for me. Leave a comment below this video and tell me where on earth you are watching from right now. What time is it where you live? If you are in New York City, or Tokyo, or London, or any other place on this planet, I want to hear from you. And if you are ready for the most complete and detailed look at this amazing story, please press that subscribe button, hit the like button hard, and share this with anyone who likes true crime stories, mob history, or just incredible tales about people. Now, let us start right at the start. On June 18th, in the year 1955, in the area of Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, Michael DiLeonardo came into the world. This was a place where people spoke Italian just as much as English, where the smell of new bread mixed with cigar smoke, and where certain men could get respect with just a look. He was born into a family where crime was not just a job. It was something passed down like a family treasure, like a special recipe or a valuable object handed from parents to children. Bensonhurst in the 1950s was its own little world. The neighborhood was a close community of people from Italy who had moved to America and their kids. They brought with them from Sicily not only their language and their food, but also their rules, their customs, and yes, their history of crime. The streets were neat, families stayed close, and everyone knew each other. It was the kind of place where you did not need to lock your door, where neighbors watched out for each other, and where kids could play outside safely, but under this surface of normal, hard-working life, another world existed. It was a world of power, violence, and secrets that everyone kept. Michael's family were the children of people who moved from Italy. They came from a small town in Sicily named Bisquino. His mother worked sewing clothes, a hard-working lady who spent hours every day at her sewing machine, making beautiful things with her skilled hands. His father was a professional bowler, a man who earned his money in the bowling places all over Brooklyn. It was a normal job that kept the family with food and clothes. On the outside, they looked like a normal, hard-working Italian-American family, chasing the American dream 1 week's pay at a time. But there was another part to the DiLeonardo family story, a part that would shape young Michael's whole life. His grandfather, Vincenzo DiLeonardo, was a man from Sicily who knew some important people in the neighborhood and carried himself with old-fashioned respect. While he was never an official member of the mob himself, he was part of the group of friends that spent time with the early Gambino family. Young Michael grew up in his grandfather's house. And this is where his real learning began, not learning about math or reading, but learning about the ways of the street, about the rules and customs of La Cosa Nostra, and about knowing that there was a different set of rules for men like his grandfather, men who had respect, who had power, who worked outside the normal rules of society from a very young age. Michael heard the name Carlo Gambino spoken with great respect in his grandfather's house and in the social clubs. Gambino was the biggest symbol of power in that world. He was the man every gangster wanted to meet, and every kid growing up in Bensonhurst dreamed of shaking hands with one day. For most children, hearing the name Carlo Gambino spoken with such honor in the social clubs and around the dinner table was like hearing about a superhero. Even though Michael never met Gambino himself, the boss's reputation was huge over the neighborhood and over every kid who dreamed of that life. Seeing how much respect the older men got just for being connected to that world planted an idea in young Michael's mind. An idea that told him this was the way to get real power and respect. The family did not have a long line of mobsters in their blood, but the culture of the neighborhood, the Sicilian pride, the street rules of loyalty and respect, the idea that real men solved their own problems, all of that was very strong. Those values were passed from the older guys to the younger ones, and Michael soaked them up like a sponge. In Bensonhurst, being connected was everything. And from a very early age, he wanted to be a part of it. Growing up in his grandfather's house, Michael learned all of this. He learned that there were two worlds. The world of regular people, the normal folks who worked normal jobs and followed society's rules. And the world of our thing, La Cosa Nostra, where different rules mattered. Where being strong and loyal and being ready to use violence decided a man's place. He learned that some men were connected, that they had power and protection that regular people did not have. He learned that in his world, your reputation was everything. Respect was earned through fear and by being loyal to the family. Not his blood family, but the crime family came before anything else. This was the world Michael DiLeonardo was born into. This was the air he breathed. The lessons he learned before he could even understand what they meant. And this was the base upon which his entire life would be built. And in the end, torn down, every legend needs a beginning. And for Michael DiLeonardo, that beginning started with a moment of fear that would mark him for life. Really, it would mark his face. He was just 10 years old, only a boy, when a dog attacked his face. The animal's teeth cut into his young skin, tearing and ripping, leaving a wound that would heal into a special curved scar across his face like a half moon. For most people, such a mark would be something to be ashamed of, something to hide, something that would make them want to hide from the world. The scar was big, and you could not miss it. It was the kind of mark that made people stare and ask questions. It was a constant memory of a time he was weak, of a moment when he had been helpless against a mean animal. In the polite world, people might have felt sorry for him. In the tough world of the Brooklyn streets, it made him a target. The kids in the neighborhood were mean. Like kids can sometimes be, they gave him a nickname. Scars, every time they said it. It was a reminder of that awful day. It was a tease. A way of pointing out that he was different. That he was not perfect in the playground games of childhood. Nicknames like this could break a child's spirit. Could make them shy, could make them a victim for life. But Michael DiLeonardo was not like most kids. He had been raised in his grandfather's house, learning the ways of men who bowed to no one, who turned things that looked like weaknesses into strengths, who got respect by being strong in their mind and ready to fight. The bullying, the teasing, the nickname instead of breaking him. They made him stronger instead of making him want to hide. They made him want to show what he could do. the scar became not a mark of shame, but a badge of who he was, not a weakness, but a special feature that made him different on the streets of Brooklyn. How you looked was important, looking tough, looking like someone you should not mess with, was key to staying alive. And in a strange turn of events, the scar that had been given to him through violence became a picture of toughness, a mark that suggested he had been in fights, that he had lived through something dangerous. As he got older, the name Scars took on a new meaning. It was no longer a tease, but who he was, a street name, a nickname that had weight in the world Michael was entering, the world of street gangs and guys who wanted to be gangsters, of tough guys and wannabes. Having a special nickname was important. It made you different from everyone else. It made people remember you. And Mikey Scars had a good sound to it. A toughness, a story built right into the name. Years later, when he became a full member of the Gambino family, when he rose to be a captain, when his name was said with fear and respect all through the criminal world, that scar would be his sign, his trademark, the thing that made people know who he was right away. The dog attack that scarred his face did something else too. It taught him at a young age that the world was a dangerous place, that pain was real, that you could not always control what happened to you. But it also taught him that you could control how you reacted to what happened. You could let it make you a victim, or you could let it make you a survivor. Michael chose to survive. Michael chose to be tough. Michael chose to take the very thing that was meant to make him smaller and turn it into who he was. This is a very important part of understanding who Michael DiLeonardo became. The scar was not just a mark on his skin. It was a turning point in his mind. It made him tough at a young age. It taught him that feeling sorry for someone was worthless, that pity was for the weak, that the only things that mattered were being strong and being ready to fight back. These lessons, learned on the playground and on the streets of Bensonhurst, would help him well in the world he was about to enter. As Michael went through his teenage years, the scar became such a big part of who he was that you could not imagine him without it. When he walked into a room, people saw the scar first. When they heard his name, Mikey Scars, they knew right away who he was. In a world where your reputation could mean the difference between getting respect or not, between doing well or failing, between living or dying, having a special identity was valuable. And Michael DiLeonardo, thanks to a childhood hurt that could have ruined him, had one of the most special identities in the whole criminal world. The boy who had been attacked by a dog had become Mikey Scars. And Mikey Scars was not someone to mess with. Family means everything in Italian culture, and in the DiLeonardo home, family meant more than just the people you lived with. It meant blood, loyalty, tradition, and a bond that could never be broken. A bond that was supposed to last forever. Michael had two brothers, Robert and James. They were more than just brothers. They were partners, friends, co-conspirators in the adventure of growing up in the rough neighborhoods of Brooklyn. Robert, especially, followed a path like the one Michael would take. He got involved with organized crime, but not with the Gambino family like his grandfather, and later, Robert became a member of the Colombo crime family, one of the other 5 families that controlled organized crime in New York. This was not unusual. Family members sometimes ended up in different crime families based on who they knew in their neighborhood, who asked them to join, and other reasons. What mattered was that both brothers were part of La Cosa Nostra. Both were living that life. Both were following in their grandfather's footsteps. The teenage years for Michael were spent running with street gangs around 15th Avenue in Brooklyn. These were not the kind of organized street gangs you see in movies, with special colors and hand signs and big initiation ceremonies. These were loose groups of tough kids from the neighborhood, young men who hung out together, got into fights together, did small crimes together, and protected their area together. It was a training ground, a proving ground, a place where young men learned the skills and built the reputations that might get them noticed by the real gangsters, the full members who controlled the neighborhood. For Michael and Robert, these years were important. They learned how to fight, how to show no fear, how to earn respect through violence when they had to. They learned the rules of the street. Never tell on a friend, always back up your crew. Answer disrespect with a fight right away, and most important, show the proper respect to full members when you saw them. These were the rules that governed street life in Italian neighborhoods in Brooklyn. Rules that had been passed down for generations. Rules that everyone understood and followed if they wanted to stay alive. But in the summer of 1981, everything changed. On July 16th, DiLeonardo's world was broken by an event that would stay with him for the rest of his life and, in many ways, plant the first seeds of the betrayal that would come many years later. Robert DiLeonardo disappeared in the summer of 1981 and has never been found. To this day, Michael says he still does not know exactly who killed his brother or why, and no one has ever been arrested for the murder. Whatever Robert had done, or was thought to have done, or was accused of doing, it had broken the crime family's rules or made someone powerful enough to order his death very angry. For Michael, who was 26 years old, this was a crushing blow. Robert was not just his brother. He was his friend, his partner, someone who understood the life. They were both living in a way that outsiders never could. They had grown up together in their grandfather's house, had run the streets together, had shared dreams of moving up in the mob together, and now Robert was gone. Murdered by the very organization he had promised to be loyal to. Killed by men who were supposed to be his brothers. In most cases, in most families, in most cultures, the murder of a brother would demand payback. The code of revenge brought from Sicily was clear. Blood demands blood. A man who does not get revenge for his brother's murder is not a man at all. In the old country, revenge could last for generations, with families killing each other in a never-ending cycle that could go on for decades. It was expected, it was honorable, it was the only right response to such a wrong. But Michael DiLeonardo was not free to follow the ancient code of revenge. He was told very clearly by his Gambino connections that he was not to get back at anyone for his brother's death. This was not a suggestion. This was not advice. This was an order from powerful men who expected to be obeyed. Robert had been killed by the Colombo family, and for Michael, who was connected to the Gambino family, to seek revenge would mean starting a war between families. It would break the rules of La Cosa Nostra, which did not allow violence between families without permission. It would mark Michael as a troublemaker, someone who could not control his feelings, someone who put personal feelings above what was good for the organization. So at age 26, Michael DiLeonardo learned one of the hardest lessons of his life. Loyalty to the crime family came before loyalty to your own blood. The organization that said it was built on honor and family and brotherhood would kill your real brother and tell you not to do anything about it. You had to swallow your sadness, push down your anger, and accept that the rules of La Cosa Nostra were more important than the ancient rules of revenge that had governed Sicilian culture for hundreds of years. This betrayal, and make no mistake, that is what it felt like to Michael, planted seeds that would stay hidden for more than 20 years. At the time, he had no choice but to accept it. He was young, he was not a full member yet. He had no power to fight the decision. He did what he was told. He did not get revenge. He kept going on his path, working for the Gambino family, building his reputation, moving up the ladder, but deep inside, something had broken, the understanding that these men, these brothers, these men of honor, would kill your blood brother and expect you to do nothing about it, change something basic in Michael DiLeonardo's relationship with La Cosa Nostra. It was a crack in the foundation. You could not see it at first, but it was real. And decades later, when it was Michael who felt betrayed by the organization, when it was Michael who was left behind by the family he had served faithfully, that crack would grow into a giant hole. The lesson was clear and brutal. In La Cosa Nostra, the organization always comes first. Your blood family, your real brothers, your personal feelings, all of these were less important than the needs and rules of the crime family. It was a lesson Michael learned well. And it was a lesson that, in a strange twist, the Gambino family would forget when they later left him behind. Even with the tragedy of his brother's murder and the bitter lesson about where true loyalty was supposed to be, Michael DiLeonardo kept rising in the criminal world. By the time he was 21 years old, he was actively working for the Gambino crime family, doing small jobs, doing favors, showing his worth to the full members who controlled the neighborhood. Actually, Michael's involvement with the Gambino family went back even further than his 21st birthday. Since the 1960s, when he was just a teenager, he had been running errands for Gambino associates. This was how it worked in those days. Young men who grew up in the neighborhood, who came from connected families, who showed the right qualities of toughness and loyalty, would start doing small jobs for the gangsters, picking up envelopes of money, delivering messages, running to the bakery or the butcher shop to get food for someone's card game. Simple tasks, but tasks that let the older men look over the young men. See who could be trusted, see who showed respect, see who had the potential to be more than just an errand boy. Michael showed promise. He was tough, he was smart, he kept his mouth shut. And he came from a family with deep roots in the organization. These were all qualities that mattered. And maybe most important, he had the right attitude. He wanted this life, he aimed for it. He saw it not as a criminal business, but as a noble calling. A tradition worth keeping alive, a brotherhood worth joining. By 1980, at the age of 25, Michael had moved up enough to open his own social club. Social clubs were common in Italian neighborhoods in Brooklyn. They were real places where men could gather to play cards, drink espresso, smoke cigars, and talk. But for gangsters, social clubs served another purpose. They were headquarters for illegal operations, places to do business away from watching eyes. Neutral ground where arguments could be settled and deals could be made. Michael's club was near the Veterans and Friends Club, another well-known hangout for mobsters. The location was smart. It put him close to other full members and showed he was someone serious about the life, someone who was investing in his future in the organization. The club was not fancy, just a storefront with some chairs and tables. Maybe a small kitchen in the back, a bathroom, and walls with pictures of Italian places, and of course, pictures of famous gangsters from the past. But the club did its job perfectly. It brought in important people in the Gambino family, men whose names would become famous in mob history. Sammy the Bull Gravano, who would later become an underboss and, like Michael, an informant whose talking hurt the family, Frank DeChico. A powerful captain who would later be blown up by a car bomb meant for John Gotti. These were serious men, respected men, dangerous men. And they were hanging out at Michael DiLeonardo's club. Michael used the club for bookmaking operations, taking illegal bets on sports games, and for loan sharking, lending money at very high interest rates to desperate people who had nowhere else to go. These were traditional mob businesses, reliable ways to make money that had been making cash for organized crime for decades. The bookmaking operation would take bets on everything from baseball and football to basketball and boxing. The loan sharking operation would lend money to gamblers who had lost big and needed to pay debts, to business owners who could not get bank loans, to anyone desperate enough to accept the terms. The terms were always harsh, the interest rates were huge, often hundreds of % each year. A man who borrowed $1,000 might owe $1,500 within a month. And if he could not pay, the debt would keep growing. And if he still could not pay, well, that is when the collectors would come. And collections in the mob were not done with nice phone calls and letters. They were done with threats, with baseball bats, with broken bones if needed. Michael DiLeonardo, for all his later success and power, was part of this system. Part of an operation that ruined lives and broke families apart for money. But his business interests went beyond his social club. Michael became partners in a produce market with Peter Castellano, who was the cousin of Paul Castellano, who was then the boss of the Gambino crime family. This was an important connection. The produce markets in New York were controlled by the mob, and having a partnership with someone from the Castellano family was both a sign of respect and a source of a lot of income. The mob's control of the markets let them set prices, force vendors to pay them, and take money from the huge amount of business that went through these important markets every day. During the middle 1980s, Michael developed another important friendship that would define much of his future in the organization. He became close friends with John A. Jr. Gotti, the son of John Gotti, Sr., who would later become the boss of the Gambino family. This friendship was more than just a casual friendship between two gangsters. It was deep enough that Michael eventually became the godfather to Junior's second son. This is a position of great honor in Italian culture that means a bond closer than blood. A responsibility to care for the child if anything happened to the father. This friendship with Junior Gotti raised Michael's status a lot. John Gotti Sr. was on his way to becoming the most famous mob boss in American history. A man whose face would be on magazine covers, whose trials would be front-page news, who would be called the Dapper Don and the Teflon Don for his stylish look and his ability to beat criminal charges. Being close to the Gotti family meant being close to power, being part of the inner circle of the family's future leaders. Everything Michael had been working for since he was a teenager, running errands for the neighborhood gangsters, was coming together. He had his own operation. He had powerful friends and connections. He had shown his loyalty and his skill, and he came from a family with deep roots in the organization. He was in the perfect position for the next step. The step that every young mobster dreamed of. The step that would change him from just an associate into a full member of La Cosa Nostra. He was ready to be made. On December 24, 1988, Christmas Eve, while families all over America were getting together to celebrate the holiday, to exchange presents and share meals, Michael DiLeonardo was about to take part in a very different kind of ceremony. One that would change his life forever and tie him to the Gambino crime family with bonds that were supposed to be stronger than death itself. Michael DiLeonardo, then 33 years old, was brought into the Gambino crime family as a full member in a ceremony led by the leaders. The making ceremony is covered in secrecy and ritual, passed down through generations from Sicily to America, carefully kept as one of the most sacred traditions of La Cosa Nostra. While the exact details of Michael's ceremony are not public, we know from other full members who later worked with the government that the ceremony follows a traditional pattern that has not changed much in 100 years. Michael would have been taken to a safe place, maybe someone's home or a back room of a restaurant, somewhere private where they would not be bothered. He would have been told to leave any weapons outside. No guns are allowed in the ceremony room when he walked in. He would have found a table with the senior members of the family sitting around it. John Gotti would have been at the head of the table with other captains and important members next to him. The ceremony would start with an explanation of what La Cosa Nostra is, what it means to be a full member, what the rules are. Michael would be told that from this moment on. La Cosa Nostra comes before everything, before his wife, before his children, before his own life. He would be told that the punishment for betraying the family is death, that once you are in for life, that there is no retirement, no quitting, no way out. Then would come the blood oath. Michael would hold his cupped hands together, and a picture of a saint, usually the patron saint of Sicily, though sometimes the Virgin Mary, would be placed in his hands. A pin or needle would prick his finger, drawing blood that would drop onto the saint's picture. Then the picture would be set on fire in his hands, and he would be told to repeat certain words, promising his loyalty to La Cosa Nostra, swearing that if he betrays the family, he will burn like the saint burns in his hands. This is powerful symbolism, carefully made to create a bond in your mind that goes beyond just words. The physical pain of the needle prick, the sight of your own blood, the heat of the flames in your hands, the serious faces of the full members watching you, all of this combines to create a moment of huge psychological impact. A moment that is meant to be remembered forever. A moment that is supposed to make betrayal impossible to even think about. After the blood oath comes the promise of omerta, the vow of silence. Michael would be told that he must never tell outsiders that La Cosa Nostra exists, that he must never work with the police, that he must never tell the names or activities of his fellow members, that he must take these secrets to his grave. The punishment for breaking omerta, he would be reminded, is death, not a quick death, but a painful one, a death that would serve as an example to others who might think about talking. Finally, Michael would be introduced to the other members there as a new full member. There would be handshakes, hugs, congratulations. He would be welcomed into the brotherhood, told that he was now part of something bigger than himself, something that had existed for over 100 years and would exist for 100 more. He was no longer just Michael DiLeonardo or even Mikey Scars. He was now a full member, a man of honor, a member of the Gambino crime family. And with that status came great privilege and opportunity. As a full member, Michael now had the freedom to operate, meaning he could run his own criminal businesses, bring in his own crew, and earn money in any way that did not clash with the operations of other full members or break family rules. He had the protection of the family, meaning that no one could hurt him without permission from the boss. He had the authority to settle arguments, to command respect, to speak for the family in dealings with other families or criminal groups. Michael was given teachers, Paul Zaccaria and Jerry Tequila, who would guide him in his new role, teach him the finer points of being a full member, help him navigate the complex politics and rules of the family. These were not casual relationships. Teachers and the mob were responsible for their students. And if a new full member made a mistake, it looked bad on the men who had said he was good. For Michael DiLeonardo, December 24, 1988, was the highest point of success. Everything he had worked for since he was a teenager, everything he had wanted since the day he heard Carlo Gambino's name spoken with respect in his grandfather's house, had come true. He was now part of the same organization his grandfather had helped start. He was now a brother to some of the most powerful criminals in America. He was now, in his mind and in the eyes of his world, a success. This was supposed to be forever. The oath he took was supposed to be unbreakable. The bonds he formed were supposed to be stronger than any other bonds in his life. The code of omerta was supposed to be absolute. Michael DiLeonardo, on that Christmas Eve in 1988, believed with complete faith that he would honor these oaths until the day he died. That he would take the secrets of La Cosa Nostra to his grave. That he would never, ever, under any circumstances, become an informant. He believed this with total certainty, and he was completely wrong. The time after Michael DiLeonardo's entry into the Gambino family as a full member was the start of what would be the most successful years of his life. These were the golden years, a time when everything he touched seemed to turn to money, when his power and influence grew very fast, when he rose from being just another soldier to becoming one of the most powerful captains in the whole Gambino organization. The year 1992 was a turning point for Michael personally and for the Gambino family as a whole. In April of that year, John Gotti Sr., the flashy boss who had been all over the headlines and had avoided being found guilty for years, was finally brought down after many trials where he had beaten the charges, earning him the nickname Teflon Don because nothing seemed to stick to him. Gotti was found guilty on many charges, including murder. The guilty verdict came mostly thanks to the talking of Sammy the Bull Gravano, Gotti's own underboss, who had become a government informant in a shocking betrayal that sent waves through the whole mob world. With Gotti going to prison for what would be a life sentence, the Gambino family needed to reorganize and fill the power hole left by his being locked up. This reorganization created chances for ambitious and able men to move up. Michael DiLeonardo was one of those men. He was promoted to captain, one of the most respected positions in any crime family. A captain is more than just a senior member. He is a leader, a manager, someone who controls his own crew of soldiers and associates, someone who runs his own operations and gives a part of his earnings to the boss. Captains go to the family's leadership meetings where important decisions are made. They have the authority to settle fights, to approve criminal activities in their area, to bring new members into their crew. Michael was given control of the family's construction and trucking illegal businesses. These were two of the most profitable areas of mob activity in New York. The construction business in New York had been taken over by organized crime for decades, and the mob's control let them fix bids, make costs higher, and force contractors and construction companies to pay them. No big construction project in the city could happen without paying money to the families that controlled the unions and the material suppliers. This was not millions of dollars. This was tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions over the years. Money that flowed steadily into mob pockets from every skyscraper, every bridge, every tunnel, every big construction project in the city. The trucking illegal businesses were similarly profitable. The mob controlled the trucking companies that carried goods in and out of the city, and they used this control to force businesses to pay them, to guarantee no labor problems, to make sure their own companies got better treatment. It was a perfect illegal business. Every business needed trucking. And if you wanted your goods delivered on time and without problems, you paid the mob their cut. Michael was given control of the 18th Avenue crew, a group of soldiers and associates who worked under his command, earning money in various criminal businesses and giving a percentage to him. As their captain, Michael was responsible for their activities, for settling arguments within the crew, for making sure they followed family rules, and for making sure they earned enough to support themselves and give money to the family. His personal life during this time showed his success. He was married to Antoniette Fapiano, who happened to be the cousin of Frank DeTico, a former underboss of the family who had been killed in a car bomb attack in 1986. This marriage connected Michael even more deeply to the Gambino family, tying him through blood and marriage to some of the most important people in the organization's history. Michael and Antoniette had a son together, Michael DiLeonardo Jr., carrying on the family name to the next generation. They lived in a $15 million mansion on Staten Island. A beautiful home that looked over Raritan Bay with views of the water and the kind of luxury most people only dream about. The house was a symbol of everything Michael had achieved. He had come from a working-class family in Bensonhurst, the son of a seamstress and a bowler, and now he was living in a mansion, driving expensive cars, wearing designer clothes, and holding huge power. This was the American dream, mob style. This was what every young guy running errands on the streets of Brooklyn wanted. Michael DiLeonardo had made it to the top of his world, and from where he stood in the early and middle 1990s, life was very, very good by the middle 1990s. Michael DiLeonardo had made himself one of the most successful earners in the Gambino family. He ran his operations from the Royal Crown Bakery in Staten Island, a real business that was the perfect front for his illegal activities. The bakery was a center of activity, with associates and soldiers coming and going, meetings being held in the back room, money being counted and handed out, and decisions being made that affected criminal operations across the city. Michael owned many tattoo parlors across Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. These were real businesses that made real income. But they also served another purpose. They were places where Michael could meet with associates, where money could be cleaned, where criminal business could be talked about without attracting the attention that might come from constant meetings in known mob hangouts. But the real businesses were just the tip of the iceberg. Michael's real money came from the traditional mob illegal businesses that had been making money for organized crime for generations. Loan sharking was still a core business, lending money at interest rates that would make credit card companies shocked. The beauty of loan sharking from a criminal view is that it is a business that feeds on itself. Desperate people borrow money they cannot afford to pay back. The interest adds up. They borrow more to pay the old debt, and before long, they are trapped in a cycle that can only end with them having no money. With violence or with both, extortion was another major source of income. Michael later admitted with remarkable honesty, "I extorted everybody I could." This was not just random shakedowns of small businesses. Though there was plenty of that, this was organized, planned extortion of companies big and small, demanding regular payments in exchange for protection from problems that, of course, would only come from the mob itself if the payments stopped. Bookmaking kept being a reliable money maker. Sports betting is a huge industry, even more so today than in the 1990s. And the illegal bookmaking operations run by the mob served gamblers who could not or would not use legal ways. The profits from bookmaking were big. The house always wins in the long run, and with good management. A bookmaking operation could create steady income week after week, year after year. Michael also provided protection to topless clubs and strip clubs, including Manhattan's famous Scores nightclub. Scores was a high-end place that served wealthy clients, celebrities, and athletes. And the mob's protection meant the club paid them in payoffs. In exchange, the mob made sure the club had no labor problems, no unwanted attention from competitors or troublemakers, and smooth relationships with any city officials who might otherwise cause problems. But Michael's criminal activities were not limited to these relatively bloodless crimes of extortion and vice. He was also involved in murder, the worst crime, the act that separates the truly dangerous criminals from the mere hustlers and con men. In 1989, Michael was involved in a murder plan that would come back to trouble him years later. The victim was Fred Weiss, a Staten Island business owner who had somehow made John Gotti Sr. angry. The exact reason for Gotti's anger at Weiss is not clear. Maybe it was a business argument. Maybe Weiss had shown disrespect. Maybe he had simply become a problem or a threat. Whatever the reason, Gotti ordered Wace's death. The actual murder was done by gunmen from the Di Cavalcanti crime family, a smaller family based in New Jersey, but with connections to the New York families. This was not unusual. Sometimes one family would do favors for another. And having outsiders do a killing meant the investigation would be more complicated. The connections less obvious. Michael DiLeonardo's role in the murder plan involved the planning and coordination, the kind of high-level involvement that showed his position in the family and his willingness to take part in the worst of crimes. The money poured in from all these businesses. Michael was earning hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, maybe millions over his time as a captain. And the beauty of being a full member, particularly a captain, was that much of this money was his to keep. He gave a portion to the leaders, the boss, Underboss, and consigliere, but the rest was his to enjoy, and enjoy it he did. The mansion on Staten Island, the expensive cars, the fine clothes, the restaurants, the trips, the gambling. Michael DiLeonardo lived the high life he had dreamed about since he was a kid. He had power, he had respect, he had money, and he had the satisfaction of knowing he had achieved everything his culture and his world valued. From the outside, Michael DiLeonardo had it made. He was at the top of his game, untouchable, successful beyond measure. He had never spent a single night in prison, which is remarkable for someone so deeply involved in organized crime. He had a beautiful home, a family, a position of power and respect. He was living the dream. But dreams, even mob dreams, do not last forever. And under the surface of this golden time, cracks were starting to form, problems were developing, and forces were coming together that would eventually bring Michael DiLeonardo's whole world crashing down around him. Success and power, especially in the mob world, often come with a feeling of being unbeatable, a belief that the normal rules do not apply, that you can do whatever you want without any consequences. For Michael DiLeonardo, this showed in his personal life in ways that would eventually add to the complexity and pain of his downfall. After 12 years of marriage to Antonietta Fabiano, Michael started an affair with a woman named Malene Fischetti. This was not just a short fling or a one-time mistake. It was a serious relationship. Serious enough that Michael set Malene up in an apartment in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, basically keeping two homes and living a double life. This kind of arrangement was not unusual in the mob. Many full members had mistresses, girlfriends on the side, second families that they supported while keeping their main family at home. It was almost expected at a certain level of success. Having a goomer girlfriend was seen as a privilege of power, a bonus that came with being a successful gangster. The money to support two homes was certainly available, and the freedom to spend time away from home without explanation was built into the lifestyle. But keeping two separate lives takes a toll, both practically and emotionally. Michael would spend time with Malene in the Bay Ridge apartment, then go back to his wife and son in the mansion on Staten Island. He had to keep track of stories, remember what he told to whom, manage the details of being in two places with two different women. And of course, there was the emotional complexity. Whatever his feelings for Antonietta after 12 years of marriage, he was now also deeply involved with Malene. Eventually, the double life became too hard to keep up. Michael and Antonietta divorced. Ending their 12-year marriage, Michael then married Malene, making the relationship that had started as an affair official. They had a son together, Anthony, giving Michael a second son and a new family to support and protect. This remarriage and new family were important not just personally, but also in terms of what would happen later when Michael eventually made the decision to work with the government. He had young children, including Anthony, his son with Malene. Who would be affected by that decision? The desire to protect his children, to provide for them, to not spend the rest of his life in prison separated from them, would become one of the things that influenced his final choice to break omerta. The two sides of Michael's life during this time are striking. On one hand, he was a feared mob captain, involved in murder, extortion, and countless other crimes. He supervised a crew of criminals, went to leadership meetings where the family's business was discussed, and held the power of life and death over those who crossed him or the family. He was Mikey Scars, a name that commanded respect and made people afraid all through the criminal world. On the other hand, he was a father, a husband, a man who probably tucked his children into bed at night and went to school events and did all the normal things fathers do. He lived in a beautiful home, kept relationships with his extended family, and took part in the regular rhythms of family life. He was Michael DiLeonardo, a family man. Someone who from the outside might have seemed like any other successful business owner living the American dream. This double-life criminal and family man, killer and father, extortionist and husband, is one of the lasting puzzles of mob life. How do men who commit terrible crimes go home and be gentle with their children? How do men who ruin lives through loan sharking and extortion keep normal relationships with their families? How do men who live by codes of violence and intimidation teach their children right from wrong? There are no easy answers to these questions, but they are important to understanding Michael DiLeonardo as a complete person. Not just a criminal or an informant. He was not a cartoon villain or a heartless monster. He was a human being with all the complexity that means, capable of love and violence, of tenderness and cruelty, of loyalty and betrayal. One fact stands out from this whole time. Michael DiLeonardo had never spent a single night in prison, even after decades of criminal activity, even with his involvement in serious crimes, including murder, even being a full member in one of the most watched and investigated crime families in America. He had managed to avoid being locked up at all. This was remarkable, a sign of his intelligence, his caution, and also a certain amount of luck. But that luck was about to run out, and when it did, Michael DiLeonardo would face the choice that every mobster fears. The choice that separates the informants from the stand-up guys. The choice that would define the rest of his life and destroy his reputation in the world he had spent his whole life trying to succeed in. The law was getting closer to Michael DiLeonardo, as it eventually does for almost everyone involved in organized crime at a high level. The FBI had been investigating the Gambino family for decades, using wiretaps, watching people, informants, and financial checks to build cases against its members. No one, no matter how careful, could work at Michael's level for years without leaving evidence, without being recorded, without being seen by law enforcement. In September 2000, Michael was charged in Atlanta with serious crimes, racketeering, extortion, and money laundering. These are federal charges, the kind that carry long prison time, the kind that can end careers and destroy lives. The government's case was built on months or years of investigation, on wiretaps and witness talking, and financial records that showed Michael's involvement in criminal activity. For most people, facing federal charges in a courtroom far from home would be terrifying. The federal government has nearly unlimited resources, experienced prosecutors, and a rate of getting guilty verdicts that is around 90%. When the feds charge you, the odds are very high that you are going to prison. But Michael DiLeonardo had the advantage of being a full member in a powerful crime family, which meant he had access to excellent lawyers, the kind of lawyers who know how to use every weakness in the prosecution's case and every protection given by the Constitution. The trial happened in August 2001, and on August 30th, A jury came back with their decision. Not guilty on all charges, Michael DiLeonardo walked out of that courtroom a free man, completely cleared of every charge the government had brought against him. His lawyer praised how he acted during the trial, saying, "He handled it like a statesman. He didn't even break a sweat. This victory must have felt incredible." Michael had faced the full power of the federal government and won. He had sat through a trial where prosecutors tried to prove he was a criminal, a racketeer, an extortionist, and a money launderer, and the jury had said, "No, you have not proven your case beyond a reasonable doubt." He could return to New York, return to his life, return to his position in the family. Cleared and victorious, the not guilty verdict might have strengthened certain beliefs Michael had about his own unbeatable nature, his own cleverness, his ability to beat the system. He had never been to prison, and now he had beaten federal charges in a full trial. He was by his own measure and by the measure of his world, a success at the highest level, but this victory would prove to be short-lived and, in the end, meaningless. The federal government does not give up easily, especially not on high-ranking members of organized crime. If one case fails, they build another one. If one set of charges does not stick, they find different charges. They have patience, they have resources, and they have determination. And they were far from done with Michael DiLeonardo. The feds were circling closer, building new cases, turning new witnesses, gathering new evidence. The Atlanta not guilty verdict had bought Michael some time, but it had not ended the danger he was in, and less than a year later, everything would come crashing down in a way that no legal victory could prevent. On June 10, 2002, John Gotti Sr., the famous boss of the Gambino family, the Dapper Don, the Teflon Don, a man who had been all over mob headlines for years and whose face had become linked with organized crime in America, died in a federal prison medical center. He was 61 years old and he died of throat cancer, his body destroyed by the disease and by the stress of years in maximum security isolation. Gotti's death marked the end of a time for the Gambino family and for the American Mafia as a whole. He had been the last of the flashy, high-profile bosses, the last mob leader to capture the public's imagination the way the gangsters of the 1930s had done. After Gotti, mob bosses would try to keep a much lower profile, understanding that media attention and celebrity status brought nothing but law enforcement looking at them and eventually being locked up. For Michael DiLeonardo, Gotti's death was personal. This was the man who had led his making ceremony on Christmas Eve 1988. The man who had given him his start as a full member. The man whose son Junior had become Michael's close friend. There would be a funeral, a gathering of the family. A moment to show respect and remember a fallen leader. 4 days after John Gotti died, Michael DiLeonardo was charged again, this time. The charges were even more serious. Conspiracy in the 1989 murder of Fred Weiss. This was not racketeering or extortion or money laundering. This was murder, the most serious charge possible. A kind of charge that carries a possible life sentence. And unlike the Atlanta case, which Michael had beaten, this case was built on talking from cooperating witnesses who were ready to say that Michael had been involved in planning Weiss's killing. Michael was arrested and held without bail in federal lockup in Manhattan. For the first time in his life, at age 47, Michael DiLeonardo was behind bars. The man who had never spent a single night in prison was now locked in a federal jail, facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life there. The cooperating witnesses who had turned against him included 2 members of the DiCavalcante crime family who had actually done the Weiss hit and a Gambino soldier. These men had decided to work with the government, to talk against their former friends in exchange for shorter sentences. They were going to take the witness stand and point their fingers at Michael DiLeonardo, explaining his role in the murder plan, providing the talking that could find him guilty and send him to prison forever for the first time in his life. Michael experienced what prison is really like, and he could not stand it. Prison is a completely different world from life on the outside, even for someone who has lived a tough life on the streets. The loss of freedom, the constant watching, the violence, the shame, the complete powerlessness, all of this hits people differently. But for someone who has spent his whole life in control, who has held power over others, who has never experienced being locked up, it can be devastating. Michael was in the Metropolitan Correctional Center, MCC, in Manhattan, a federal place that holds people waiting for trial. It is not the worst prison in America, but it is still prison. Small cells, limited movement, constant noise, the presence of dangerous people, the soul-crushing boredom of life in an institution. For someone like Michael, used to living in a mansion, eating in fine restaurants, going where he wanted when he wanted, this was a nightmare. And the reality was setting in. He might be here for the rest of his life. The evidence against him was strong. The witnesses were believable. The charge was murder, even with an excellent lawyer, even with the best defense money could buy. The odds of beating this case were not good, and if he was found guilty, he would likely get a life sentence. He would die in prison, probably in a maximum security place, spending decades in a small cell, never seeing his children grow up, never tasting freedom again. For a man who had everything: power, money, respect, family, the thought of losing it all and spending the rest of his life in a cage was too much to bear. And soon, Michael DiLeonardo would learn that his situation was even worse than he thought. While Michael sat in federal lockup, word reached him from the outside about what was happening with the Gambino family. The news was devastating, a betrayal that cut deeper than any prison sentence could. The family had cut off his income. All the money that had been coming to him and his family from his various criminal businesses was gone. The crew he had supervised, the operations he had controlled, the businesses he had built, all of it was being taken over by others. And none of the money was being sent to support him or his family. In mob terms, he was being shelved, stripped of his rank as captain, removed from his position, basically kicked out of active part in the family. This was not just a money problem, though the money impact was severe. Michael had a wife and children to support, legal bills that were growing by the day, and suddenly no income, but beyond the money. This was a huge insult, a statement that the family no longer valued him, no longer considered him worthy of support, no longer cared about him or his family. The accusations made it even worse. Michael was accused of stealing from the family, a charge he strongly denied. In mob culture, stealing from the family is one of the worst things you can do, a wrong that can carry a death sentence. Whether the accusation was true or made up as an excuse to cut him loose, Michael saw it as a betrayal of the most basic kind. He had given his adult life to the Gambino family. He had committed crimes for them, had earned money for them, had moved up through the ranks through his skill and loyalty. He had taken the oath on Christmas Eve 1988, had promised his life to the family, had sworn he would honor Omerta until death. He had expected that in return, the family would take care of him, especially in his time of need. In the mob, there's an understanding that when a member gets arrested, when he goes to prison, the family takes care of his family. They provide money to support his wife and children. They pay his legal bills. They show respect for his sacrifice. This is part of the deal of La Cosa Nostra. You risk everything for the family, and the family takes care of you and yours. But the Gambino family was not taking care of Michael DiLeonardo. They were leaving him. They were cutting him loose at the moment when he needed them most. They were showing him that all the talk of brotherhood and family and loyalty was, in the end, just talk when it came down to it. When it was inconvenient or expensive or risky to support him, they simply walked away from his cell. Michael sent a message back to the family. A message that showed both his defiance and his growing understanding of what his situation really meant. I don't remember dying or getting life in prison. I may come home one day, the meaning was clear. If he beat the charges and got out, there would be a settling of accounts. He had not forgotten the betrayal, and he would not forgive it. But the family had made their decision. They had shelved him, stripped him of his position, and cut off his income. His crew stopped visiting him in jail. The money stopped coming. The men he had protected and provided for and led turned their backs on him. The organization he had given his life to was showing him that his loyalty meant nothing, that his years of service meant nothing, that he meant nothing for Michael DiLeonardo. Sitting in that cell, facing life in prison, left by the family he had promised his life to. Something broke. The betrayal crushed him, shattered whatever illusions he had left about the honor and goodness of La Cosa Nostra. He had seen his brother murdered and been told not to seek revenge, but he had accepted that as part of the rules, part of the price of being in the life. But this was different. This was the family leaving him when he had done nothing wrong except get arrested, something that happened to gangsters all the time, and was supposed to be met with support, not abandonment. Later, thinking about this time, Michael would say, "It was a betrayal. It crushed me." And that crushing feeling of betrayal would lead him to a decision that would change not just his life, but the lives of dozens of other men, would devastate the Gambino family, and would make Michael DiLeonardo one of the most important cooperating witnesses in American mob history. But before he made that decision, he would hit an even lower point, a moment of such deep sadness that he would try to end his own life. The combination of facing life in prison, being left by the family he had given his life to, and the crushing psychological weight of his situation pushed Michael DiLeonardo to the edge. And in 2002, sitting in his cell in the Metropolitan Correctional Center, he went over that edge. The specific reason for his suicide try was the thought of what he was facing. He was being asked, or more accurately, his lawyer was suggesting he consider working with the government to talk against his former friends, including his close friend Junior Gotti. The thought of doing this, of becoming a rat, of breaking omerta, of betraying men he had called brothers, was too much. Even after everything that had happened, even with the family cutting him off, even with being left in his time of need, even with facing life in prison, Michael still held on to some core belief in the code he had sworn to uphold. Talking would make him a rat, the lowest thing a man could be in his world. It would destroy his reputation, would make his name linked with betrayal, would turn him into the very thing mobsters hate most. But the other choice was spending the rest of his life in prison, dying behind bars, never seeing his children grow up, never tasting freedom again. It was an impossible choice. A choice that tore at the very base of who he was. Who was Michael DiLeonardo? Was he a man of honor who would never break omerta no matter what? Or was he a survivor who would do whatever it took to keep his freedom and his life? Unable to solve this conflict, unable to see a way forward that did not destroy him one way or another, Michael tried to kill himself. He took too many prescription pills. Probably pills that had been given to him by prison medical staff for different problems. The try was serious. This was not a cry for help or a move meant to get attention. He wanted to die. He wanted to escape the impossible situation he was in. He wanted to end the mental pain that was tearing him apart. He was found in time. Prison staff stepped in. Medical treatment was given, and his life was saved. But the try had serious results. He was placed on suicide watch, a special status in prison where you are watched all the time to prevent more tries. Your things are taken away. You are given special clothes that cannot be used to hurt yourself. And you are watched around the clock. It is a shameful, dehumanizing experience, but it is also necessary to save lives. Michael was also given psychiatric counseling, therapy sessions with mental health professionals who tried to help him work through the psychological crisis he was having. These sessions would have explored his feelings of betrayal, his fear of the future, his conflict between his loyalty to the code and his desire to survive. They would have provided support and perspective, helping him understand that he was facing an impossible situation and that whatever decision he made did not make him weak or dishonorable. It made him human. The suicide try had another result, one that would affect Michael's family relationships for years. His son, Michael DiLeonardo Jr., was very angry about his father becoming a rat, about the very fact that his father was even thinking about cooperation. In mob families, the children often take in the values and codes of their fathers. And Michael Jr. had clearly taken in the belief that working with the government was the worst betrayal. The one thing you cannot forgive, the relationship between Michael and his son was badly damaged by this crisis. Michael Jr. saw his father's thinking about cooperation as a weakness, as a betrayal not just of La Cosa Nostra, but of everything that DiLeonardo name stood for, everything his great-grandfather Vincenzo DiLeonardo had helped build. The son was angry, disappointed, and probably also scared. If his father cooperated, the family would become targets. They would be in danger. They would have to enter witness protection and leave everything behind. But in the end, Michael DiLeonardo had to make a choice. And in November 2002, he made it. He called his Atlanta lawyer, Craig Gillen, the same lawyer who had successfully defended him in the earlier racketeering case. And he told Gillen that he wanted to look into working with the government. This was the moment. This was the breaking point. This was when Mikey Scars, DiLeonardo, decided to do the unthinkable, to break the oath he had taken on Christmas Eve 1988, to break the code of omerta that he had sworn to uphold until death, to become what he had once thought was the lowest form of life, a rat, an informant, a cooperating witness. The decision was made. There was no going back. Michael DiLeonardo's life, as he had known it, was over, and his new life as the most important cooperating witness in American mob history was about to begin. The process of cooperation does not happen overnight. It is a complex, carefully planned series of meetings, interviews, debriefings, and talks between the defendant, his lawyers, the prosecutors, and the FBI agents who have been investigating the case. Both sides have to look at whether cooperation makes sense, whether the information being offered is valuable, whether the witness is believable and reliable. For Michael DiLeonardo, the first step was proffer sessions, meetings with prosecutors and FBI agents where he would tell them what he knew, what he had done, what crimes he could talk about, and who else was involved. These sessions are done under what is called a proffer agreement or Queen for a Day agreement, which means that what the defendant says in these sessions cannot be used against him in court, with some exceptions, but can be used to see whether a cooperation deal should be offered. Michael's proffer sessions must have been amazing. Here was a man who had been a captain in the Gambino family, who had been involved in the life for decades, who knew the inner workings of the family at the highest levels, who could talk about murders, extortion, loan sharking, and countless other crimes. He could name names, describe operations, explain how the family worked. and provide talking that could lead to guilty verdicts of dozens of full members and associates. The prosecutors and FBI agents listening to Michael's story would have quickly realized what they had: a gold mine of information. A witness who could possibly destroy the Gambino family and even provide information about other families. This was the kind of cooperating witness law enforcement dreams about, someone with deep knowledge, high-level access, and the willingness to talk openly in court. On May 23, 2003, Michael DiLeonardo officially pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy and 3 murders. He stood before a federal judge and admitted his crimes, confessed his involvement in murder, acknowledged his part in decades of criminal activity. He pleaded guilty to involvement in the murders of Frank Heidel and Fred Weiss. As well as another murder, he admitted to extortion, loan sharking, witness tampering, and many other crimes. This guilty plea was the first step in his cooperation. By pleading guilty, he was accepting responsibility for his crimes, which is a requirement for cooperation. You cannot cooperate and say you are innocent. You have to admit what you have done before the government will trust you to talk about others. After his guilty plea, Michael was let out on bail, an unusual step that showed the government's confidence in him and their belief that he would do his cooperation duties. Most people facing murder charges do not get bail, but cooperating witnesses are treated differently. The government needs them to be available for interviews, for trial preparation, and in the end, for talking. And it is easier to prepare a witness who is not in jail. Michael entered the Federal Witness Protection Program, known as WITSEC. This is a program run by the U.S. Marshals Service that gives new identities and moving help to witnesses who talk against dangerous criminals. Witnesses in WITSEC are given new names, new social security numbers, new identification papers, basically a complete new identity. They are moved to a different part of the country, away from the people they talked against, away from anyone who might want revenge. Michael was moved with his second wife, Malene, and their children. They moved to a secret location, started living under new names, started new lives far from New York and the world of organized crime. For his children, especially the younger ones, this must have been traumatic, being torn away from everything they knew, from their schools and friends, from their extended family, from their home, and being told they could never go back, could never even tell anyone where they were or who they really were. But the other choice was worse. Michael had made powerful enemies. He had talked against the most dangerous criminals in America. He had broken omerta in the most public and damaging way possible. There would be a price on his head, a contract on his life, and anyone who could find him would earn a big reward and a lot of respect in the criminal world for killing a high-profile rat. So Michael DiLeonardo, a man who once had everything: power, money, respect, a mansion, a crew of criminals under his command, now had nothing but a new identity and the protection of the federal government. He had traded one life for another, had given up everything he had worked for, had destroyed his reputation in the only world that had ever mattered to him. But he was alive, and he was free in the sense that he was not going to spend the rest of his life in prison. Whether this trade was worth it, whether he had made the right decision, only time would tell. But there was no going back now. The confession had been made, the guilty plea had been entered, and the cooperation had begun. Now came the hard part: talking against his brothers, destroying the family he had once promised his life to, and becoming the most important informant in American Mafia history. The size of Michael DiLeonardo's cooperation was like nothing before in the history of American organized crime. Over the next years, he would talk at 14 trials, some sources say 15. More than any full Mafia member in history, His talking led to the guilty verdicts of over 80 mobsters. A crushing blow to the Gambino family and to organized crime in New York as a whole. These were not low-level associates or small-time criminals. Michael's talking helped find 20 high-level, dangerous mob figures, guilty captains, acting bosses, important soldiers. The kind of men who had held real power in the criminal world for decades. He helped federal authorities get back about $30 million in property. Money that had been earned through illegal activities and hidden by mobsters who thought they would never have to account for it. Federal prosecutors called his cooperation revolutionary and historic. This was not an exaggeration in the long war between law enforcement and organized crime. Cooperating witnesses have been key to getting guilty verdicts. The mob's code of silence, omerta, had always been their greatest strength. Without cooperating witnesses, it was very hard to prove what went on behind closed doors, to establish the structure of the families, to connect bosses to the crimes done by their underlings. But when high-ranking members break omerta, when they take the witness stand and explain how everything works, when they name names and describe crimes in detail, the whole structure becomes weak. Sammy the Bull Gravano had done this in the early 1990s, talking against John Gotti and others, helping to put Gotti away for life. But Michael DiLeonardo's cooperation was even bigger. He talked at more trials, provided information about more criminals, and in the end, had a bigger impact on the Gambino family than any single cooperating witness before him. The preparation for this talking was intense. Michael would have spent countless hours with FBI agents and prosecutors, going over his talking, looking at documents, looking at photographs, making timelines, and getting ready for cross-examination. Defense lawyers are good at attacking cooperating witnesses, pointing out that they are criminals who have made deals to reduce their own sentences, suggesting that they are lying to please the government, highlighting differences in their stories. Michael had to be ready for all of this. He had to know his talking perfectly, had to be the same across many trials, had to stand up to aggressive cross-examination from some of the best defense lawyers money could buy. And he had to do this while knowing that his former brothers were sitting in the courtroom staring at him, that his reputation was being destroyed with every word he spoke, that his son and others who still believed in the old codes were watching and judging him. But Michael DiLeonardo proved to be an extremely effective witness. He was well-spoken, detailed, the same, and apparently believable. Juries believed him. Judges praised his cooperation. Prosecutors valued him so much that they brought him back trial after trial to talk about different people and different crimes. Part of what made him so effective was his high rank as a captain. He had been told information that ordinary soldiers never knew. He had gone to administration meetings where the family's business was discussed. He knew the family structure very well. He could explain how decisions were made, how orders were given, how money moved up the chain of command. He could talk not just about his own crimes, but about the crimes of others, about the whole criminal business that was the Gambino family. Another factor in his effectiveness was his willingness to talk about anyone. No matter what personal relationships, Michael did not hold back or protect anyone. If he knew about their crimes, he talked about them. This included people he had been close to, people he had considered friends, even his godson's father. This ruthlessness in his cooperation, while making him even more hated in the mob world, made him priceless to prosecutors. The impact of Michael's cooperation on the Gambino family cannot be stated too strongly. The family had to rush to fill leadership positions as captains and high-ranking soldiers were found guilty and sent to prison. The power structure was broken, operations were shut down, and a feeling of paranoia and distrust settled over the family. If Mikey Scars could flip, If a captain with his background and his high rank could break omerta, then who could be trusted? Who else might be cooperating? Who else might be wearing a wire? This paranoia is one of the most damaging effects of high-level cooperation. It does not just put individual criminals in prison. It weakens the whole organization by destroying the trust that the organization depends on to work. When no one can be trusted, when every conversation might be recorded, when any brother might be a rat, the organization becomes paralyzed, ineffective, vulnerable. Michael DiLeonardo's cooperation helped achieve what decades of FBI investigations and prosecutions had been working toward: the systematic taking apart of the Gambino family's power structure. And he was just getting started. The trials were about to begin. And Michael was going to send a lot of men to prison for a very long time. The list of people Michael DiLeonardo talked against reads like a who's who of the Gambino family, and even goes to members of other families. Each trial was another chapter in the destruction of the organization he had once served. Another group of men sent to prison based on his talking. Another nail in the coffin of omerta. One of the most important people was Peter Gotti, John Gotti's brother, who had become the boss of the family after John's being locked up in death. Talking against the boss of the family was a powerful statement, a showing that Michael was holding nothing back, that no one was safe from his cooperation. Peter Gotti would be found guilty and given a long prison sentence. Removing yet another Gotti from power, Michael also talked against Louis Big Lou Valario, a powerful captain who had been an important figure in the family for years. Valario was someone Michael had known well, had worked with, had gone to meetings with now. Michael was on the witness stand explaining Valario's crimes, describing his role in the family, providing the talking that would send him to prison. Maybe the most emotionally difficult talking was against John A. Junior Gotti, the son of John Gotti Sr. and Michael's close friend. These two men had been so close that Michael was the godfather to Junior's second son, a relationship of great importance in Italian culture. They had spent time together, worked together, shared the bonds of friendship that were supposed to go beyond everything. Now, Michael was talking against Junior in connection with the 1992 shooting of Curtis Sliva, the radio host and founder of the Guardian Angels, who had been critical of the Gotti family. Sliva had been shot by a masked gunman in a rigged taxicab in a try to kill him that Sliva amazingly survived. Junior Gotti was charged with ordering the hit, and Michael DiLeonardo talked about what he knew about the planning and permission for the attack. The Junior Gotti trial was particularly complex because it ended in many mistrials. Juries could not reach decisions. Stuck on the question of whether the prosecution had proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Junior had ordered the hit, even with Michael's talking and other evidence. Junior Gotti was never found guilty of the Sliva shooting. The many mistrials showed both the difficulty of prosecuting mob cases and government's persistence in trying to find high-ranking mobsters guilty. Michael talked against Charles Carneglia, a particularly dangerous hitman who was suspected of involvement in many murders. Carneglia was the kind of criminal that even other criminals feared. Someone who had no problem with killing and who had supposedly dissolved bodies in acid to get rid of evidence. Talking against someone like Carneglia required courage, even from witness protection, even with a new identity. The thought of what would happen if such a man ever found you must have been terrifying. The cooperation went beyond the Gambino family. Michael talked against Alphonse Alley Boy Persico and John Jackie DeRoss of the Colombo family, the same family that had killed his brother Robert decades earlier. There is a certain irony in this. The family that murdered his brother, whose leaders had forbidden him from seeking revenge, was now facing justice partly because of his talking. He also talked against Richard V, Gotti and Richard G. Gotti. More members of the big BThe family network that had controlled the Gambino family for years. By the time Michael was done cooperating, the Gotti family's hold on the Gambino organization had been greatly weakened. With multiple family members found guilty and locked up based partly on his talking, beyond talking against specific people, Michael provided detailed information about the membership lists of all 5 families: the Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno families that had controlled organized crime in New York for decades. This kind of intelligence was priceless to the FBI, helping them understand the current structure of each family, who the leaders were, who was moving up, and how the families interacted with each other. Michael also showed the details of the construction and trucking, illegal businesses that made millions of dollars for the families. He explained how bid rigging worked, how construction companies were forced to pay, how union leadership was controlled, how no-show jobs were created, how the mob kept its hold on these important industries. This talking helped prosecutors build cases not just against individual criminals, but against the systematic corruption that let organized crime grow. He detailed white-collar operations, to the loan sharking networks, the bookmaking operations, the money laundering plans, the complex financial arrangements that let mobsters hide their illegal income and live fancy lifestyles while looking legitimate on paper. This financial intelligence helped the government go after property, taking properties, bank accounts, and businesses that had been bought with illegal money. Each trial followed a similar pattern. Michael would take the witness stand, be sworn in, and then spend hours or even days answering questions from prosecutors about what he knew, what he had done, and what others had done. The prosecution would lead him through his talking carefully, establishing his believability, having him explain the structure and operations of La Cosa Nostra, then moving to the specific crimes and specific people important to that trial. Then would come cross-examination, where defense lawyers would attack his believability. They would point out that he was an admitted murderer and criminal. They would highlight that he was talking in exchange for a shorter sentence. They would try to find differences in his talking, contradictions between what he said at one trial versus another. They would suggest that he was lying to please prosecutors, making up stories to reduce his own punishment. But trial after trial, Michael's talking held up. He was the same, detailed, and apparently honest about what he knew. He did not try to add to or exaggerate. When he did not know something, he said so. When he was not sure about a detail, he admitted it. This honesty, combined with his huge knowledge of the family's operations, made him a devastating witness. And trial after trial, guilty verdicts followed. The men he talked against were found guilty, given long prison sentences, taken off the streets and out of the organization. The Gambino family was being systematically taken apart, one guilty verdict at a time. And Michael DiLeonardo was the main instrument of that destruction. One of the most high-profile parts of Michael D. Leonardo's cooperation was his talking about the Curtis Sliva shooting, a case that got a lot of media attention and brought together some of the key people in this whole story in a dramatic courtroom face-off. Curtis Sliva was a radio personality in New York and the founder of the Guardian Angels, a volunteer group that walked the streets trying to prevent crime. Sliva was outspoken and controversial, and in the early 1990s, he had been especially critical of John Gotti and the Gotti family on his radio show. He made fun of them, called them out, and generally made himself a very visible and vocal enemy of one of the most dangerous crime families in America. On June 19, 1992, Sliva was a passenger in what looked like a real taxi cab in Manhattan, but the taxi was actually rigged. It had fake door handles that stopped passengers from opening the doors from the inside, basically turning it into a moving trap. As the taxi moved through traffic, a masked gunman came out and shot Sleva many times at close range. Amazingly, Sleva survived, even though he was shot several times. He managed to escape the taxi by jumping through a window and survived his injuries. The shooting was big news, a bold try to kill someone in the middle of the day in Manhattan, and law enforcement immediately suspected mob involvement. Years later, when cases were being built against the Gotti family, the Sleva shooting became a central charge. The government said that John Jr. Gotti had ordered the hit, carrying out his father's wishes to silence the troublesome radio host. Michael DiLeonardo, as a high-ranking member of the family and close friend of Jr. Gotti, knew about the situation around the shooting, and he was called to talk about what he knew. The trials of Jr. Gotti for the Sleva shooting became a saga of their own. The first trial ended in a mistrial when the jury could not reach a decision. The prosecutors tried again, another mistrial. And again and again. In total, there were many trials for the same charge, each ending in a jury that could not decide, each showing the difficulty of proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Jr. Gotti had ordered the hit. Michael talked at these trials, providing what information he had about the shooting and what happened after. But even with his talking, even with other evidence presented by the prosecution, even with other cooperating witnesses also pointing to Jr. Gotti, the juries could not all agree on a guilty verdict. In the end, the government gave up, and Jr. Gotti was never found guilty of the Sleva shooting. Curtis Sleva went to Michael DiLeonardo's eventual sentencing hearing, a dramatic moment when the victim and the cooperating witness who talked about his shooting were in the same courtroom. Sleva sat there as Michael was sentenced to time served for his cooperation, basically walking free, even with his admitted involvement in murder and many other serious crimes. The prosecution asked Sleva if he would shake Michael's hand, maybe as a sign of forgiveness or recognition that Michael's cooperation had been valuable. Sleva refused. His words were direct and unforgiving. "I will never forgive. Never forget." This refusal is important because it shows the moral complexity of cooperating witnesses in organized crime cases. From the government's view, Michael DiLeonardo was a hero of sorts. He had broken omerta, risked his life to talk, helped find dozens of dangerous criminals guilty, and provided priceless intelligence about organized crime. His cooperation had made New York safer, had disrupted criminal businesses, and had achieved guilty verdicts that might otherwise have been impossible. But from Sleva's view, and from the view of other victims of mob violence, Michael was still a criminal who had committed terrible crimes, and was basically getting away with them. Yes, he had cooperated, but that cooperation was self-serving. He did it to avoid life in prison, not out of regret or a sudden moral awakening. The men he talked against were dangerous criminals, but so was he. The fact that he helped put others in prison did not erase his own crimes or heal the wounds he had caused others. This moral uncertainty is at the heart of the cooperating witness system. The government makes deals with criminals to catch other criminals, reducing or getting rid of sentences for terrible crimes in exchange for talking. Is this justice? Or is it just a practical tool that lets some criminals escape full punishment while making sure others go to prison? There are no easy answers to these questions, and Curtis Sleva's refusal to shake Michael D. Leonardo's hand showed that moral complexity in a single powerful action. After years of cooperation, after talking at 14 trials, after helping find over 80 mobsters guilty, after providing intelligence that devastated the Gambino family and helped the broader fight against organized crime, Michael DiLeonardo finally reached his own day of judgment. His sentencing hearing. On September 9, 2011, Michael appeared before Judge John Gleason in federal court for sentencing on his guilty plea to racketeering conspiracy, which included admitting involvement in 3 murder plans under normal conditions. These charges would have carried a life sentence or at least decades in prison. Michael had admitted to taking part in murder plans, to running criminal businesses, to extorting victims, to decades of criminal activity. Any normal person facing these charges would expect to spend most or all of the rest of their life behind bars. But Michael DiLeonardo was not a normal person. He was a cooperating witness whose talking had been called historic and revolutionary by federal prosecutors. And in the federal system, cooperation is rewarded with big sentence reductions. Sometimes dramatically big. Judge Gleason sentenced Michael to time served, plus 3 years of supervised release. Time served meant that he got credit for the about 3 years he had spent in federal custody since his arrest. And he would not have to serve any more prison time. He was basically walking out of the courtroom a free man, subject to supervision rules. Even though he had pleaded guilty to multiple murders and decades of racketeering, the judge praised Michael's cooperation, recognizing the important contribution he had made to law enforcement's efforts against organized crime. Prosecutor Ellie Honig, who had worked with Michael on many cases, called his cooperation nothing short of historic. The courtroom was full of FBI agents and prosecutors who had worked with Michael over the years, and they clapped as he was sentenced. This is an amazing scene to think about. Here was a man who had committed terrible crimes, who had taken part in murders, who had extorted countless victims, who had lived a life of crime for decades, and law enforcement officials were clapping for him. They were celebrating his sentence, recognizing his contribution, treating him as an ally instead of a criminal. Michael DiLeonardo came out of the courtroom smiling, shaking hands with law enforcement people, hugging FBI agents and prosecutors. The man who once would have been their sworn enemy, who they would have worked tirelessly to put in prison, was now being treated as a colleague, a partner in the fight against organized crime. This is the strange reality of the cooperating witness system. When you flip, when you cooperate, when you provide valuable talking, you change from being the enemy to being an asset. The same prosecutors who would have looked for the maximum sentence now argue for your release. The same FBI agents who investigated your crimes now shake your hand and thank you for your service. You are still a criminal. You still committed all those crimes. But you are now their criminal, their asset, their witness for Michael. The sentence of time served meant freedom, but freedom with big limits. The 3 years of supervised release meant he would be watched by probation officers, would have to follow various rules, would have to check in regularly, would have his activities looked at, and of course, he would have to stay in witness protection for his own safety. But compared to spending the rest of his life in prison, this was an incredible result. Michael had made a bet that cooperation would be worth it, that talking against his former brothers would be better than dying in prison. And from a purely practical view, the bet had paid off. He was walking out of the courtroom, breathing free air, going home to wherever his WITSEC location was, to his family. But the question remained, was it worth it? Was freedom at this cost, the destruction of his reputation, the label of rat that would follow him forever, the loss of his identity, the permanent danger he would face, the broken relationship with his son worth avoiding a life sentence? Only Michael could answer that question. And the answer probably changed depending on the day, the mood, the circumstances. What was clear was that the most important cooperating witness in American Mafia history had finished his cooperation, had gotten his reward, and was now free to live out the rest of his life under a new identity in a new location. As a new person, the old Michael DiLeonardo, Mikey Scars, the mob captain, was dead. The new person, whoever he was pretending to be now, could start the next chapter of his strange and controversial life. The immediate result of Michael DiLeonardo's cooperation and sentencing was devastating for many people. For him personally, for his family, for the Gambino crime family, and even for the broader world of organized crime in New York. For Michael personally, the label of rat was permanent and could not be escaped. In the world he came from, in the culture that had shaped his whole identity, there is no lower status than that of an informant. You can be a murderer and still be respected if you are a stand-up guy who does not cooperate. You can be a thief, an extortionist, a loan shark, and still keep your honor if you keep omerta. But once you break that code, once you talk, once you become a rat, you are the lowest of the low, beneath being thought about. Deserving of death, Michael was now, and would forever be, labeled a rat by his former friends and by anyone in the mob world who knew his story. His name became linked with betrayal. Mikey Scars the Rat was how he would be known in the criminal world. His cooperation discussed as a warning story. His decision to flip held up as an example of the worst kind of dishonor. Even his own son, Michael DiLeonardo Jr., had turned against him. The relationship between father and son was destroyed by Michael's decision to cooperate. For a man who had lost almost everything else, his position, his money, his reputation, his identity, the loss of his son's respect and love, must have been particularly painful. Your children are supposed to love you no matter what, supposed to stand by you even when the whole world turns against you. But Michael Jr. could not or would not forgive his father's betrayal of the codes they both had been raised to honor. Michael became a marked man with a contract on his life. This was not just a theoretical danger. Mob families have long memories and big resources, and they have killed cooperating witnesses years or even decades after their talking. Michael would have to spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, wondering if every stranger might be a hitman, if every unexpected meeting might be his last. Anyone who could find him and kill him would earn big respect in the mob world, would be celebrated for taking out a high-profile rat. This constant threat required living forever in witness protection, living under a new identity, keeping the story of being someone else for the rest of his life. No more being Michael DiLeonardo, no more being Mikey Scars. He would have to answer to a different name, make up a fake past to explain his history, avoid anyone who might recognize him from his old life. His wife and children would have to do the same, keeping these lies forever, always aware that being found could mean death. For the Gambino crime family, the result was catastrophic. The family had to rush to fill leadership ranks as captains and high-ranking soldiers were found guilty and locked up based on Michael's talking. Crews that had been working for years had to be reorganized. Operations had to be shut down or restructured. Money that had been flowing reliably suddenly dried up as the family structure was broken. But maybe more damaging than the immediate organizational chaos was the feeling of paranoia and distrust that settled over the family. If Mikey Scars could flip, if a captain with his background, grandson of a founder, full member for over a decade, close friend of the Gotti family, could break omerta, then who could be trusted? How could anyone be sure their closest friends were not also cooperating? Every conversation became suspect. Every meeting was a possible trap. Every associate could be wearing a wire. This paranoia is destructive to criminal organizations, which depend on trust and loyalty to work. When no one trusts anyone else, it becomes hard to do business, hard to plan operations, Hard to keep the unity that lets the organization survive law enforcement pressure. The Gambino family, once one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world, was badly weakened by Michael's cooperation and by the broader trend of high-ranking members choosing cooperation over being locked up. The impact went beyond just the Gambino family. Michael's cooperation was part of a larger trend of full members breaking omerta, of high-ranking mobsters deciding that cooperation was better than life in prison. Sammy Gravano had done it. Now Michael DiLeonardo had taken it even further. Other mobsters facing serious charges and long sentences looked at these examples and understood that cooperation was an option, that the old code did not have to be followed, that survival could be chosen over honor. This trend added to the decline of traditional organized crime in America. The Mafia in the 2020s is a shadow of what it was in the 1980s and early 1990s. The families still exist. They still do criminal operations, but their power and reach have been greatly reduced. Law enforcement has become much more effective at fighting them, partly because of RICO laws that allow prosecution of whole criminal businesses and partly because of cooperating witnesses who break the code of silence and provide the talking needed for guilty verdicts. Michael DiLeonardo's cooperation played an important role in this decline. His talking directly led to the guilty verdicts of over 80 mobsters. His intelligence helped the FBI understand and disrupt criminal operations. His willingness to break omerta encouraged others to do the same. In the long war between law enforcement and organized crime, Michael DiLeonardo was a weapon that dealt crushing damage to the mob, but the human cost of this cooperation, both for Michael personally and for the families torn apart by his talking, was huge. This was not a clean victory for justice. This was a messy, morally complicated result where a murderer went free in exchange for helping lock up other murderers, where families were destroyed, where codes that had lasted for generations were shattered, where no one came out untouched. Behind the numbers 80 guilty verdicts, $30 million taken back, 14 trials are human stories of devastation, betrayal, and loss. Michael DiLeonardo's cooperation did not just affect criminals. It affected families, relationships, and communities in ways numbers can never fully show. One of the most controversial parts of Michael's talking was his showing that John Gotti had fathered a child with a mistress. This was not directly related to any criminal case, but it was information that came out during talking, and it deeply angered Gotti's widow, Victoria. Here was a woman who had stood by her husband through many trials, through his being locked up, through his death from cancer in prison. She had kept her dignity and her loyalty even as her husband became one of the most infamous criminals in American history. And now Michael DiLeonardo, talking against her son, was telling intimate family secrets, showing an affair, bringing shame and pain to a widow who was already dealing with the death of her husband and the prosecution of her son. Whether this showing was necessary to any prosecution or whether it was unnecessary is debatable, but the pain it caused was real. Victoria Gotti was furious, and her anger highlighted the extra damage cooperation causes beyond just the criminal people. Michael's relationship with his son. Michael DiLeonardo Jr. was destroyed for a father. There are few pains greater than losing the love and respect of your child. Michael Jr. had grown up in the mob life, had taken in the values and codes of La Cosa Nostra, and in his eyes, his father's cooperation was unforgivable. He saw it as weakness, as betrayal, as a break of everything the family stood for. The relationship could never be fixed, not really. Even if they eventually made up on some level, even if words of forgiveness were spoken, the basic break had happened. Michael Jr. had seen his father do the one thing that was supposed to be impossible to even think about: That knowledge would always be there, always be part of their relationship, always be a wall to true closeness. And it was not just Michael Jr. Extended family members, friends, associates, anyone connected to Michael from his old life had to deal with what he had done. Some might understand or even support his decision to cooperate. Others would see it as betrayal. But no one could ignore it or pretend it had not happened for Michael's second wife. Malene and their children, the cost was also huge. They had to give up everything: their home, their community, their extended family, their friends, their whole lives to enter witness protection. The children had to leave their schools, say goodbye to their friends without being able to explain why, move to an unfamiliar place, and start living under false identities. For young children, this kind of disruption can be traumatic, creating psychological marks that last for years. And they had to do all of this not because of something they had done, but because of Michael's choices. First, his choice to become a mobster and commit crimes, and then his choice to cooperate and talk. They were paying the price for his decisions. Living in hiding because his former friends wanted him dead. Forced to keep elaborate lies because the truth could get them killed. Beyond his immediate family, there were the families of the men he talked against. Wives who watched their husbands be found guilty and sent to prison based on Michael's talking. Children who grew up without fathers because Michael decided to cooperate. Extended families who lost sons, brothers, uncles to the prison system because Michael chose survival over loyalty. Were these men criminals who deserved to be in prison? In most cases, yes. These were serious criminals who had committed terrible crimes and caused important harm. But their families, the innocent people who loved them, still suffered, and from their view, Michael DiLeonardo was the rat who destroyed their families, the traitor who sent their loved ones to prison to save himself. Michael himself would face mental health struggles from the betrayal and guilt he experienced. The suicide tried before his cooperation showed the psychological toll the decision to flip took on him. But even after cooperation, even after walking free from the courtroom, the psychological burden remained. He had broken the deepest code of his culture. He had betrayed men he had called brothers. He had destroyed his own reputation and identity. Living with that, even while living in freedom, must have been difficult. The question that probably haunted him, that probably still haunts him, is, was it worth it? Was survival at this cost worth it? Was freedom bought through betrayal truly freedom? Or was he just trading one kind of prison physical, being locked up for another psychological torment and permanent exile from the only world he had ever known? There are no easy answers to these questions. Different people looking at Michael's situation will come to different conclusions about whether he made the right choice. Some will see him as a survivor who refused to go down for an organization that betrayed him first. Others will see him as a coward who broke the sacred code when things got tough. Both views have merit, and the truth is probably somewhere in the complicated space between them. What is clear is that cooperation, even successful cooperation that leads to freedom, comes with a huge human cost. Michael DiLeonardo is alive and free, but he is also a man without a country, a man without an identity, a man whose name has become linked with betrayal, a man who lost his son's love and respect, a man who can never truly be himself again. Whether that is better than spending life in prison is a question only he can answer. The years after his sentencing have been a strange and new chapter in Michael DiLeonardo's life. For most cooperating witnesses, the cooperation ends with their talking. They enter witness protection and disappear into being unknown, living out the rest of their lives under false identities, never to be heard from again publicly. That is the standard path, the safe path. The path witness protection is made to help, But Michael DiLeonardo, maybe unable to completely let go of his past identity, maybe wanting to control his own story, maybe simply needing a way to share his experiences, made some unusual choices at some point. He left witness protection, at least for a while or officially, though the exact conditions and timing of this are not clear. Leaving witness protection is an important decision that removes the official protection and support of the U.S. Marshal Service, though it does not necessarily mean returning to one's old identity or location. More remarkably, Michael started a YouTube channel called No Excuses, where he shares mob stories and experiences from his years in organized crime. This is an amazing development, a former high-ranking mob captain turned cooperating witness creating public content about his life and experiences, basically confirming his identity and location, at least roughly, to anyone who wants to find him, including those who might still want revenge. The channel represents something that would have been impossible in earlier times. A cooperating witness openly discussing his experiences, not hiding, not keeping complete anonymity, but instead actively engaging with the public about his past. On the channel, Michael tells stories about his time in the mob, explains how things worked, discusses various people he knew, and provides insights into the culture and operations of La Cosa Nostra. This kind of openness serves several purposes. It lets Michael control his own story, to tell his story in his own words instead of having it told only through court talking and media reports. It provides a way for his experiences and knowledge, letting him share a lifetime of stories that most people will never have access to. And maybe, on some level, it lets him keep a connection to the identity he had to give up, to still be Mikey Scars, even if he cannot be Michael DiLeonardo, the mob captain. But it is also dangerous. Every video he posts, every story he tells, every public appearance he makes is a reminder that he is out there, that he is reachable, that someone motivated and resourceful enough could possibly find him. For someone with as many enemies as Michael has men he talked against who are now out of prison, family members of those he helped find guilty, associates who see him as the ultimate traitor, this public presence seems extremely risky in interviews and in his content. Michael has shown a level of self-awareness and honesty that is relatively rare among cooperating witnesses. He admits that his talking was an act of betrayal and weakness. He does not try to pretend that what he did was noble or honorable by mob standards. He does not claim that he cooperated out of some moral awakening or new respect for the law. He is honest about what he did and why he did it. He cooperated to avoid spending his life in prison. He chose survival over loyalty. He broke the code because the other choice was too much to bear. This honesty is refreshing in a way, even if it does not free him from the betrayal. Michael is not trying to rewrite history or to pretend he was something other than what he was, a criminal who committed serious crimes and then cooperated to save himself. He is living proof that the mob life offers only limited endings: prison, death, or betrayal. He chose betrayal. He is living with the results of that choice, and he is honest about what those results have been. Michael DiLeonardo remains a controversial figure, seen very differently depending on who is doing the seeing. To law enforcement, he's a success story, a valuable cooperator whose talking achieved important results in the fight against organized crime. To the Gambino family and the mob world generally, he is a rat, a traitor, someone whose name is spoken with hate. To students of organized crime, he's a fascinating case study in what makes men break omerta and what happens when they do. To his family, he is a complicated figure, a father who made difficult choices, a husband who dragged his family into witness protection, a man who chose survival but paid a huge price for it. as Michael lives out whatever years remain to him. He exists in a strange middle ground between identities, not quite the mob captain he once was, not quite the new person he is supposed to be in witness protection, but something in between. A man defined by his cooperation, by his talking, by his decision to break the code that was supposed to be unbreakable. He is living proof that oaths taken in blood can be broken, that codes that seemed absolute can bend, that loyalty has limits, and that when men are faced with the choice between honor and survival, survival often wins, whether that makes him a villain or a victim, a coward or a practical person, a traitor or a survivor. That is a question everyone who hears his story has to answer for themselves. The story of Mikey Scars DiLeonardo is much more than just the story of one man's rise and fall in organized crime. It is a case study in loyalty and betrayal, in honor and survival, in the codes that men live by and the situations that make them break those codes. It is a story that raises deep questions about justice, morality, and the price of freedom. As a record-breaking informant who helped find over 80 mobsters guilty across many families, Michael changed law enforcement's fight against organized crime in ways that are still being felt today. His cooperation showed that even the most deeply set members of La Cosa Nostra, even men with the deepest family roots in the organization, even captains who had sworn blood oaths and lived the life for decades, could be turned. Before Michael's cooperation and the cooperation of others like Sammy Gravano, there was a belief in the mob world that full members, particularly high-ranking full members, would not flip. There was confidence in omerta, in the power of the oath, in the strength of the code. But Michael and others proved that when faced with life in prison, when left by the organization they served, when given the choice between dying in a cell and talking, even the most committed mobsters would choose survival. This had a spreading effect on organized crime. The wearing away of omerta has been one of the most important factors in the decline of traditional mafia families. When members cannot trust each other, when any conversation might be recorded by a cooperating witness, when today's captain might be tomorrow's star witness for the prosecution, the whole organizational structure becomes weak. Michael showed the inner workings of La Cosa Nostra like few before him. His detailed talking about the family structure, its operations, its rules, and its rituals gave law enforcement and the public a look they had never had before into how these organizations work. He described administration meetings, explained how orders were given and carried out, detailed how money moved through the organization, and showed the personal dynamics between family members. His grandfather, Vincenzo DiLeonardo, was a Sicilian immigrant who knew some connected people in the neighborhood and carried himself with old-fashioned respect. While never an official full member himself, he was part of the group of friends that spent time with the early Gambino family. Decades later, his grandson helped destroy it, or at least helped devastate it to the point where it became a shadow of its former power. There's a poetic irony in this. The family tradition that had brought crime into the DiLeonardo bloodline in the end led to one of the most important blows ever struck against that same criminal tradition. Michael DiLeonardo's cooperation had impacts that went far beyond his individual talking. It changed how things were done. Mob families became more careful about what they said and where they said it. The use of phones and electronics went down. Meetings became more guarded. The assumption that any member might be cooperating changed how business was done. It increased paranoia and distrust. When high-ranking members flip, it creates suspicion throughout the organization. Who else might be cooperating? Who can be trusted? This paranoia is destructive and makes the organization less effective. It showed the FBI's effectiveness. Michael's successful cooperation showed that the FBI's strategy of turning witnesses and using them to take apart organizations from within was highly effective. This encouraged more aggressive going after of cooperating witnesses. It added to the mafia's decline. While many factors added to the decline of traditional organized crime, the cooperation of high-ranking members like Michael was important. The families in the 2020s are much weaker than they were in the 1980s and 1990s, and cooperation has been a major reason why. It changed the calculation for mobsters. Every mobster facing serious charges now knows that cooperation is an option that can lead to freedom instead of life in prison. This knowledge affects decision-making and makes it more likely that others will choose cooperation. As we reach the end of this complete look at Mikey Scars, DiLeonardo's life, we are left with a complex picture of a deeply imperfect human being who made choices that destroyed lives, both through his crimes and through his cooperation. He was born into a family where crime was tradition, where his grandfather had been a Sicilian immigrant who knew some connected people in the neighborhood and carried himself with old-fashioned respect. He grew up idolizing that life, aiming for it, and in the end achieving it, becoming a full member, rising to captain, holding power, and earning a lot of money. He committed serious crimes, including taking part in murders. He extorted victims, ran loan sharking operations, and lived off the suffering of others. He was not a good person by any normal moral standard. He was a criminal, a violent one, someone who hurt people for money. But he was also a father, a husband, a friend. He was someone who had been raised in a particular culture with particular values, and who lived according to those values until situations made him question them. He was someone who, when his loyalty was not given back, when the organization he served left him, made the choice to survive rather than to honor a code that had not honored him. His cooperation put 80 men in prison. Some of those men were dangerous criminals who had committed terrible crimes and deserved to be locked up. Their being locked up made society safer, but Michael's talking also destroyed families, caused suffering to innocent people related to those found guilty, and earned him the label of rat that will follow him to his grave. Was he wrong to cooperate? Was he right to cooperate? The answer depends completely on your moral framework, your cultural background, and your beliefs about loyalty, honor, and survival. There is no objectively correct answer. What we can say with certainty is that Michael DiLeonardo's life story is a warning tale about the mob life and its unavoidable results, even after achieving everything he aimed for being made. Becoming a captain, living in a mansion, holding power, he in the end lost it all. His life proves that the mob life does not have happy endings. You go to prison, you die, or you betray everything you once believed in to avoid those fates. His grandfather helped build La Cosa Nostra. He helped tear it down. The organization that had been passed through generations of his family was weakened importantly by his talking. Whether this was justice or tragedy depends on your view. What cannot be denied is that Mikey Scars, DiLeonardo will be remembered as one of the most important figures in the modern history of American organized crime, not for his power or his power or his power, and for most important figures in the modern history of American organized crime, not for his power or his power or his power or his power or his power, the most important figures in the modern history of American organized crime, not for his power or criminal achievements, but for his cooperation, for his talking, for his decision to break the code that was supposed to be unbreakable. He chose survival. He chose his freedom over his honor. He chose to see his children grow up over rotting in prison. Whether those were the right choices, whether he is a villain or a victim, whether he deserves blame or understanding. That is for each person who hears his story to decide. So, here we are at the end of this deep dive into one of the most fascinating and controversial mob stories ever told. Mikey Scars, DiLeonardo. From the grandson of a Sicilian immigrant who knew some connected people in the neighborhood, to the most important mob informant in American history. A man who rose to the top of one of the world's most powerful crime families, only to bring it crashing down from the inside. His talking put 80 men behind bars. His betrayal changed the Gambino family forever. And his choice, made in a prison cell when his brothers left him, reminds us that in the world of organized crime, loyalty is only as strong as the moment it is tested. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think DiLeonardo was a coward who broke the code? Or was he a survivor who refused to go down alone for people who betrayed him first? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And these discussions are what make this community so special. If you made it this far through this complete story, you are part of a special group. Show your support by hitting that like button. It really helps more than you know and lets me create more content like this. Subscribe if you want more long-form gangster stories that go deeper than anyone else, that do not just scratch the surface, but dive into the psychology, the results, and the human cost of the mob life. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. We have more legends, more betrayals, and more truth coming your way. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, the mob life might look glamorous, but it only ends one way.